I was on my knees in Gideon Kane's bedroom, scrubbing the baseboard where dust hides like secrets. The room smelled faintly of cedar and expensive soap, the kind of clean that makes you nervous. My sleeve rode up as I reached under the window ledge, and the purple marks on my forearm flashed in light. I felt it before I heard it, the subtle shift of weight behind me, the air thickening as if the house had taken a breath. When I looked up, Gideon stood in the doorway, still as a locked gate, eyes fixed on my arm today. He didn't raise his voice or rush me. He crossed the carpet with unhurried certainty, then stopped a few steps away, leaving space like proof of control. My instinct was to cover everything, pull fabric down, offer a lie that sounded like weather. I did it anyway, because survival habits don't ask permission. But his attention stayed on the bruises, then flicked to the faint cut near my cheekbone, and I knew the details had already landed. His face didn't show anger. It showed conclusion. My pulse hammered, asking what happens when he decides and whether I'd survive the answer. The strange thing was how quiet it felt, like the house expected me to obey before I even understood the rules. My hands kept moving, but my mind jumped backward, to the moment the bruises were made. The night before had begun the way the worst nights do, with headlights sliding across our curtains and Derek Voss's truck grinding into the driveway. It was 10 o'clock at night, and the silence after the engine died was its sound. I'd learned that silence as a kid, the way you learn weather, not what it is, but what it means is coming. I had been home for 4 days. I'm back in Chicago after clinical rotations that gave me a future. I thought coming home meant building something steady for me and Eli. I pictured pancakes on Saturday mornings, a stack of applications, my mother laughing again. Instead, I found Evelyn Hart moving through our kitchen like she was trying not to take up air. Derek watched her the way bored men watch a match they plan to strike. I told myself I would fix it. I didn't know how. I only knew I could not let my son grow up in fear. Derek came through the door smelling of liquor and cold air, scanning for a reason. My mother made the mistake of wanting an explanation, and I felt the temperature drop. I heard her shoulder hit the wall before I saw anything. My body moved on reflex, the same reflex that once made me step between fists and flying words. I put myself in front of her, trying to be a shield without making noise. Derek's rage turned toward me, offended, as if my presence was betrayal. He grabbed my wrists, and my skin learned new colors before I could breathe. After, the house went quiet in the way it always did, like it was ashamed to witness itself. I checked Eli, leaning over his bed to count breaths, praying he hadn't heard anything. At midnight, I cleaned the cut on my cheek with a cloth, pressing until the sting dulled. I watched my forearms darken in the mirror and told myself bruises heal. By 5 a.m, my mother sat at the kitchen table with an ice pack, and tears she refused to explain. She wasn't crying from pain. She was crying from tiredness that turns escape into fantasy. Near dawn, she told me, in a voice that barely reached the table, that she could not go in. Missing a day meant losing the paycheck that kept our rent paid and Eli fed. For 12 years, she had cleaned Gideon Kane's estate without ever calling out, as if perfect attendance could protect her from everything else. She pressed her binder into my hands, pages filled with routines, preferences, and warnings. I saw shame tucked inside every practical instruction. She wanted me to pretend nothing was wrong. I nodded. Survival was a habit. Then I said I would go today. I went to Eli's room first because every decision begins with him. He slept on his side, unaware of the adult storms in our hallway. I smoothed his hair back and imagined a childhood where doors didn't slam like warnings. In the bathroom, I rolled my sleeves down and watched the fabric hide the bruises, pretending cloth could erase truth. My mother waited in the kitchen doorway, holding herself carefully, eyes wet but steady. She didn't ask me to be brave. She asked me to be careful. I kissed Eli's forehead, lifted my bag, and stepped into the gray morning. The city looked half asleep, streetlights fading as if nothing bad could happen in daylight. I told myself I was only covering a shift, only following a list, only earning time. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, the sitter's number pinned to my mind like a prayer. Under my sleeves, my skin throbbed, and I forced my breathing slow and quiet. Just one shift, I repeated, because repeating it made it sound true. Ahead waited iron gates, unfamiliar rules, and a woman named Marisol who would judge me in seconds. I didn't know the Kane estate would judge me. At 7:15 in the morning, the taxi turned off the main road and climbed a private drive lined with trees and cameras. Iron gates waited at the end, black bars set into stone, and they opened in silence once the driver confirmed my address. My phone stayed in my pocket, my thumb resting on the sitter's last message. Eli was awake and asking when I'd be home. Guilt didn't care. It sat under my ribs and made every breath feel too noticeable. The house came into view. Pale stone, wide windows, lawns cut like a pattern. The taxi stopped at a side entrance because my mother's binder had one rule underlined twice. Staff never use the front door. I stepped out, tugged my sleeves down, and repeated the same sentence in my head. Work first, feelings later. Marisol opened the door before I could knock. Head housekeeper. Gatekeeper. She looked me over in a professional sweep. Face, hands, binder, then turned as if my arrival had already been filed and approved. She led me through a service corridor that smelled of lemon polish and warm laundry. Her instructions came like a checklist. Which cart, which closets, which rooms mattered most. I listened the way I listened on a hospital floor, quiet, fast, and focused, because panic is loud, and loud gets punished. My phone buzzed once. I ignored it. I opened my mother's binder instead. Pages of tight handwriting, routines turned into rules. Bedroom doors stay open, personal items never moved, towels replaced in pairs, baseboards wiped even when nobody checks. A small star marked the master suite, underlined twice like a warning that didn't want to be spoken out loud. I started on the ground floor, and moving through rooms that looked like nobody ever argued in them. Carpets swallowed footsteps. The air smelled clean, not lived in. I learned the rhythm quickly, where staff crossed, which doors stayed locked, how the silence shifted when someone important passed nearby. Once, a door clicked somewhere deep in the house and my body braced out of habit. Nothing followed. The quiet held, steady enough to feel unreal. Late morning, Marisol was pulled away to manage a delivery at the rear gate. She left me with the list and a look that said I got one chance to prove I belonged in this machine. I took the stairs to the upper floor, binder in hand, stomach tight. The hallway was long and carpeted, lined with doors that looked identical until you noticed the security hardware. The last item on my list was the master bedroom. I stopped outside it and read the notes again, like rereading could turn fear into skill. Knock twice. Wait. Enter with the door open. Be thorough. Be invisible. I knocked softly, waited, knocked again. No answer. I pushed the door open and rolled my cart inside, keeping the doorway clear the way the binder demanded. The room was bigger than my apartment. Light filtered through curtains into a calm gray. The bed was made with sharp corners, a kind of order that felt like control. I went to the far wall and dropped to my knees with a cloth, starting on the baseboards because my mother had taught herself to begin where nobody checks. My sleeve caught on the trim and slid up my forearm. I didn't notice until the air changed. Not colder, heavier, as if the room had gained weight. I looked up and saw Gideon Kane in the doorway, dark suit, no tie, face unreadable except for the way his eyes locked on the bruises climbing my arm. I yanked my sleeve down too late. My mind reached for the old excuse, the one that makes harm sound like clumsiness, but his attention didn't move. He crossed the room without hurry and stopped a few feet away, leaving space like a boundary. Then he crouched, not to comfort me, but to see clearly. The calm in his expression felt final, like a decision already made. He had me stand. He looked at my arm, then at my face, then at the way I held myself like I expected a hit from the air. I tried to redirect with facts, my mother's years of work, my reason for being here, how I could finish the list. Gideon listened with patience that didn't soften anything. He didn't accept my minimization. He wanted the name of the person who did this. And then when I tried to dodge it, he called out the missing truth with quiet certainty. He turned his head toward the hallway and spoke to someone I couldn't see, voice too low to catch. Footsteps moved away at a fast, purposeful pace. Gideon faced me again and made the next step feel inevitable. His security lead, Cole Mercer, was going to my address. Cole was bringing Evelyn and Eli here. Safe, comfortable, out of reach. My first instinct was to refuse. My mother would be frightened by strangers. Eli would be confused. And part of me still believed I didn't deserve help that came this clean. But the house was already moving. Doors clicking, radios murmuring somewhere beyond the walls. And I realized protection here wasn't a favor. It was an order being executed. I stood in Gideon Kane's bedroom with a rag in my hand, a relief pressing against dread, and understood that just one shift had ended the moment he saw my arm. The gravel announced them before I saw the car. I was halfway down the staircase, moving too fast for a house that didn't echo, when the side door opened. My hands were still damp from cleaning, and my heart kept trying to solve problems by pounding harder. Cole Mercer stepped in first, broad shoulders, neutral face, the kind of man trained to help without making it about himself. Behind him, my mother looked smaller than she had that morning, like pain had folded her inward. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut, and she carried her arm close to her body as if it belonged to someone else. Eli was tucked against her hip, one hand fisted in her sweater, the other gripping a small backpack with cartoon rockets. His eyes found mine and held, serious in that way children get when they're counting exits. I crossed the hall in 3 steps and stopped myself from crushing them both, because my mother's ribs had been bruised before, and I recognized the careful breathing. I touched her shoulder lightly, then slid my hand to Eli's back, feeling for tremors the way I did on the clinic floor. My mother tried to straighten, tried to smile, tried to act like this was a normal ride to work. The shame sat on her skin louder than any bruise. I kept my voice soft in my head, telling her I'd handled things, telling Eli I was here, telling myself not to fall apart in a hallway full of strangers. Marisol appeared like she'd been waiting behind a wall, and she guided my mother toward the east wing without asking a single question. A young staffer set a tray on a table, tea, ice, clean towels, then disappeared with eyes lowered, as if privacy was part of the job description. No one stared at my mother's face. No one stared at my sleeves. I should have felt safe, but my body stayed braced, shoulders high, hearing danger in every quiet footstep. Eli climbed onto the edge of the chair beside my mother and watched the room like he was the guard. When Cole knelt to speak to him, Eli didn't lean in. He leaned closer to me instead. That tiny movement hit me harder than any threat, because it told me he understood more than I wanted him to. I smoothed his hair, pretended calm, and hated that this estate was becoming his new picture of normal. While my mother sipped tea, I replayed the last month in my head and saw patterns I'd ignored. Derek hadn't only hit walls and people, he'd hit our finances, our routines, our ability to speak freely. He'd name-dropped Gideon Kane at the dinner table like it was a weapon he could borrow. He'd asked my mother what rooms she cleaned, what days Gideon was home, what kind of cars came through the gates. He called it curiosity, but I'd seen the hungry look in his eyes when he talked about access. I felt sick realizing he'd been using my mother's job as a leash, tugging whenever he wanted to remind her how small we were. And now I was inside the place he'd tried to turn into a bargaining chip. Around noon, the house shifted again. A door closed somewhere deeper, and then Gideon Kane walked down the hall as if he'd been out for coffee, not whatever he'd gone to do. His coat was still on, his cuffs neat, his expression unreadable. But the staff moved a fraction faster when he passed. He looked at my mother once, a quick assessment that made me think of triage, then his eyes met mine. What he said, in that level tone, was that Derek understood the situation. No details, no bragging, just a line delivered like a stamped document. My mind tried to fill in blanks, and I forced myself not to imagine anything I couldn't undo. I didn't want blood. I wanted distance. Gideon's calm made me believe distance had been arranged. He left as quietly as he'd come, and my lungs finally remembered how to expand. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, a vibration that felt like a hand on my throat. The message was short, the kind of sentence Derek used when he wanted control without witnesses. He reminded me that mothers can be judged, that courts like clean stories, and that people believe the man who stays calm. He hinted he could make me look unfit, reckless, dangerous, just by choosing the right words. I stared at the screen until it blurred, then turned it face down so Eli wouldn't see my hands shake. Anger rose, hot and clean, and underneath it a sharper fear, because threats with paperwork lasted longer than bruises. I looked at my mother resting in a room she didn't dare claim, and at my son watching every adult face for weather. Relief was real, but it felt fragile, like glass on stone. If this was safety, why did my pulse still race? I took a slow breath, tucked the phone away, and made myself a promise I could keep today. Stay present, stay careful, stay standing. Tomorrow would come, and with it the strange quiet of this estate, the routines that could soothe or suffocate. And I wondered if these walls were sanctuary, or a different battlefield where I'd have to learn peace. The first days at the Kane estate blurred together, not because they were chaotic, but because they were almost too steady. Evelyn's swelling faded in slow stages, yellow replacing purple, her breathing easing when she forgot to guard her ribs. She tried to smile more than she could, then caught herself and looked away, as if relief was something she had not earned. Each morning she insisted on dressing like she was going to work, then sat down carefully and waited for permission she never asked for. I watched her hands twitch toward chores, searching for movement in the quiet. I kept working anyway, pushing my cart through hallways that smelled of polish and money, because motion made my thoughts behave. Marisol gave me lists without warmth, and I treated them like shift orders, checking corners, counting towels, wiping what no one saw. My phone stayed close, but I only looked when the sitter texted, because Derek's messages still made my stomach drop. Even behind gates, my shoulders stayed lifted, waiting for a door slam that never came. The estate's silence was different from ours at home. Expensive, controlled, maintained. It felt like velvet over warning, and I listened hard. Eli explored in small circles, never running far, as if distance itself was risky. He learned which staff smiled with their eyes and which ones kept their faces blank. A gardener offered him a lemon from a tree in a glass room at the back of the house, and Eli held it like treasure. The sunroom became his orbit. One afternoon, light poured through the panes and turned dust into glitter. He made a spaceship out of napkins and laughed, a real laugh that startled me. My chest tightened, not from sadness, but from distrust of happiness in that moment. Joy had always been followed by something in our old house, a mood shift, a slammed cabinet, a punishment for being loud. At the estate, nothing followed, and that made me more nervous than pain. Evelyn saw Eli laughing and tried to rise from her chair too quickly, then sat again with a grimace she pretended was nothing. Later I found her folding towels that did not need folding, aligning edges like she could control the world by straightening fabric. I wanted to tell her she was safe, But Pulse refused to agree. Safety, I was learning, does not arrive. On the fourth evening, while I was wiping fingerprints from a stair rail, a low tone sounded somewhere outside, not an alarm that screamed, but one that asked attention. Staff paused mid-motion. Radios murmured in clipped bursts. Through a window, I saw headlights stop at the gate, then back away, slow and deliberate, like someone touching a hot surface to prove it was real. No one ran. No one panicked. The message was simple even without words. We see you in there. My mouth went dry. I could not tell if the warning was for Gideon or for me. Gideon did not appear, but his system did. Cole moved through corridors with a tablet, and Marisol's lists changed shape, suddenly focused on doors, sightlines, and who was where. Locks were checked twice. Curtains were drawn in rooms that never used curtains. Staff spoke less and listened more. When Gideon finally passed through the hall, he looked calm enough to be bored, yet everything around him tightened, like a belt pulled one notch. I watched from the edge, aware that this was the version of safety his world offered. Quiet readiness. It was impressive. It was terrifying and oddly comforting. My guilt flared anyway. I pictured Derek at home, hands on my mother's paycheck, and I pictured an invisible reach I could not yet name. I wondered if my bruises had invited this test, if bringing Eli here had put a target on a child who deserved cartoons and scraped knees, not gates and guards. I checked him, counting him the way you count medications. He tolerated it with a sigh that made him seem older than 6. That night I could not sleep. I listened to the estate's silence and tried to decide whether it was peace or camouflage. The next day the house ran a drill. It looked like a schedule change, but my body recognized the pattern. Staff shifting positions, doors closing in sequence, radios humming low. Marisol guided us toward a sitting room while Cole checked the hall. I held Eli's hand, then released it for 1 second to adjust his backpack strap. And in that gap, he slipped behind a column to look at a painting. When I turned, he was gone. My mind went white, and then loud. I searched corners, calling his name inside my skull, because fear had trained me to whisper. 2 minutes is nothing in a normal life. In mine, it was a whole future falling through my hands. Then Eli appeared beside Cole near the doorway, eyes wide, cheeks flushed, still holding his rocket backpack. I gathered him close and felt my legs tremble after the danger had already passed. I'm the way fear saves its payment for later. He clung to my shirt, small and real, and I concentrated on breathing until my pulse slowed. That was when the lesson landed. Safety is not a feeling. It is a system. And I needed knowledge to steady myself right now. After Eli vanished for those 2 minutes, my brain started measuring everything like a chart. Evelyn's bruised ribs meant shallow breaths, no lifting, no prideful chores. On the third morning, I asked Marisol for a medical reference book, the kind with diagrams that don't flinch. She pointed me to the library and reminded me, with her eyes, to return it exactly where I found it. I carried the volume to my mother's room, checked her pupils, listened to her breathing, and wrote notes on a scrap of paper because facts keep fear from multiplying inside me when the hall quiets. On that afternoon, once Evelyn was dozing and Eli was busy building napkin rockets, I walked back down the corridor with the book hugged to my chest. The library door was heavy, and the air inside smelled of leather, dust, and something older, like patience. Lamps threw warm pools over tables. The quiet here was different from the estate's quiet. It wasn't enforced. It was chosen. I slid the reference onto the return cart, then froze because someone was already there, sitting in the deep chair by the window, a textbook open across his knee, Gideon Kane, reading like he belonged. He didn't look up right away, and that gave me time to notice details. His suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing watch marks and the same steadiness I'd seen in the hallway. The book wasn't a business ledger. It was a medical text, all old enough to have softened corners, its spine cracked from use. Margins were crowded with handwriting in two inks, faded black notes that looked like a younger man's urgency, and newer blue marks that circled the same passages, as if he kept returning to the same unanswered questions. My throat tightened, seeing that. I remembered the way he'd checked Evelyn when she arrived, how his eyes followed her gaze, how he watched her shoulders for guarding, how he noticed Eli's flinch before I did. I'd told myself it was instinct, the kind powerful men develop from danger. But instinct doesn't know cranial nerves or pain patterns. Training does. I stood there, half in shadow, wondering why a man like Gideon kept a medical book like a secret. The floorboard creaked under my weight, and he finally lifted his head. Attention settling on me with quiet completeness, I felt seen again, which scared me. I explained, in a rush of politeness, that I'd borrowed the reference to check my mother's ribs, and I was returning it. He nodded as if he already knew, as if nothing in his house happened without being noticed. His gaze moved once to the book I'd held, then to my hands, and I could feel him weighing the difference between fear and competence. He asked, without softness, what I studied. I told him, nursing, and the words sounded like a confession in that room. He waited, patient, until my reasons surfaced, the ones I usually swallowed before anyone listened. I said I chose it because I grew up where people got hurt and nobody came, and I wanted to be the person who came anyway. The sentence left my mouth and hung there, plain and undeniable. For a moment his expression changed, not into kindness, but into recognition, like he'd met that loneliness before. He looked down at the textbook across his knee, thumb resting on a page dense with anatomy. He told me, in the careful way men reveal fractures, that he'd once been close to finishing this life. Then circumstances chose for him, and he never forgot. He didn't give me dates or drama. He let the truth sit between us like a file left open. 2 semesters, he implied, and the rest of his life had turned into something else. I pictured a younger Gideon in a lecture hall, hands ink-stained, hoping knowledge could be protection. Now he was a man with guards and gates, still circling the same chapters in blue ink at night. We talked in that rare way where nobody performs, about detours, about choices made under pressure, and about what it costs to rebuild yourself around what you lost. Keep breathing anyway. Outside the window the grounds darkened, and the lamp made a small circle of light on his book. I should have left. I knew it the way you know a wound hurts before you touch it. But Eli's face kept flashing in my mind, and my mother's tired hands, and my own bruises hidden under sleeves. I told Gideon softly that he could still finish what he started, that he wasn't too late, and that my life had taught me waiting costs more than trying. His jaw tightened once, like restraint becoming choice. The room felt altered, as if listening. When I stepped back into the hallway, the estate's silence returned, crisp and watchful. I carried nothing now, but I felt like I'd touched a sealed door in him and heard it click. Downstairs, staff moved with practiced calm, and somewhere a printer hummed, spitting out schedules and reports, the kind of clean paper that can ruin a life as efficiently as a fist. I thought of Derek's message, of courts and labels, of how easy it is to make a mother look dangerous. I needed stability, proof, something solid, and I had just challenged a powerful man to change. By the next morning, the estate looked normal again, but it didn't feel normal inside me. Evelyn's eye was less swollen, Eli was drawing rockets at the kitchen table, and I was wiping fingerprints from a staircase that never seemed to collect dust. Still, the house moved with a new tightness, like a belt pulled one notch. Phones rang in short bursts, then went quiet. Marisol shifted the cleaning roster twice before noon, pretending it was routine. Cole Mercer passed me in the hall and checked that my son stayed near staff-approved rooms. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. Even the gardeners kept glancing toward the gate cameras. I tried to breathe like I taught patience, slow in and slower out, but my body kept listening for trouble in every pause. I told myself it was pressure, not my problem, and lied. What kind of danger knocks softly? That afternoon, around 2:30 in the afternoon, a young assistant in the pantry started shaking while stacking cups. Her breaths turned shallow, eyes wide, hands clumsy. Nobody wanted to make a scene in Gideon Kane's house, so she tried to swallow it, which only made her chest hitch harder. I stepped in beside her and guided her to sit, keeping my voice low and steady in my own head. I counted her breaths, watched the color in her lips, and asked her to match my pace, and reminded her feet were on the floor. The tremor eased a little. When I looked up, Gideon was in the doorway, not close, not looming, just watching like he was reading a monitor. He didn't interrupt, but his gaze tracked every change. Training, I thought. He noticed outcomes. Later, Cole nodded thanks, and the assistant returned to work, cheeks damp but calmer again. I was walking back to the East Wing when the process server arrived. Not a thug, not a shouting man, just a woman with a clipboard and an envelope, escorted by security as if she belonged. She asked for Maya Hart, and my stomach dropped because my name sounded wrong in this place. Cole took the envelope, confirmed my identity, and handed it to me like it was nothing. The papers inside were clean, typed, full of careful accusations. Neglect, instability, dangerous associations. Derek had filed for emergency custody and painted himself as the calm parent, the reasonable one. The hearing was in 72 hours. 72 hours to convince strangers that bruises and fear weren't my parenting plan. Eli ran past in the hallway, laughing at a plane, and the sound hit me like a bell. I pressed the papers to my chest and felt my knees soften. On paper, Derek looked like someone you'd trust with a car key. He had a job title, a steady address, a talent for sounding concerned. He wrote about my erratic behavior and my unsafe environment without mentioning why I left home in the first place. He used the estate like a stain, implying I'd traded my son's safety for a man's money. I could almost hear him rehearsing it. Calm voice, clean hands, dirty heart. My mind raced through worst outcomes. Eli crying in a courthouse hallway, a judge believing the wrong story, my mother blamed for needing work. Anger rose, but fear sat on top of it, heavy and cold. I wasn't afraid of Derek showing up to yell. I was afraid of strangers deciding I was unfit because I finally asked for help. I stared at the line and realized he was trying to win by looking civilized. Gideon found me in a side hallway, not because I called him, but because his house notices everything. He didn't ask me to calm down. He treated my panic like information. He brought an attorney to the estate that evening, a woman with sharp eyes and a folder already labeled. He told Cole to pull camera logs, gate records, and every message Derek had sent. He arranged a safe transport plan for court day, and sent a childcare backup that didn't depend on me begging favors. What surprised me most was what he did not do. He didn't tell me to stay hidden. He didn't demand gratitude. He didn't frame help as ownership. He laid options on the table and let me choose, as if my consent mattered more than his comfort. Watching him build structure around my fear, I felt something unfamiliar, the possibility that protection could be clean too. Night fell, and the estate lights came on in measured rows, like someone drawing boundaries with electricity. I sat on the edge of my bed with the paperwork spread out, reading the same lines until they lost meaning. The threat wasn't loud. It was official. Derek wanted me to run, because running would make his story true. I understood that, and still my instincts screamed to pack, grab Eli, and disappear to a place with no gates and no name attached. I pictured a suitcase by the door, my old escape plan dressed up as responsibility. But when Gideon checked on us, his presence steady and distant, I felt the weight of my own choice. He wouldn't force me to stay, and he wouldn't let me pretend leaving was the only brave option. He wanted a decision built on reality. I wanted my son. I wanted proof. The countdown had started. By the 6th day, my mother's swelling had turned the color of old sunlight, and she could lift her arm without wincing. That tiny progress should have made me happy. Instead, it made me restless, because it meant my original reason to stay was dissolving. So I did what I always do when fear gets loud. I packed. I opened my suitcase on the guest room bed and folded my clothes into clean squares, stacking them with clinical precision. Every fold felt like a decision I could control, one I didn't have to ask for. Even breathing followed the rhythm. Evelyn appeared in the doorway with a cardigan pulled tight, pretending she had simply wandered in. She watched me pack for a long moment, her face doing that complicated math of relief and guilt. In her eyes, I could see the truth she was trying not to say. Gideon Kane hadn't sent security for a housekeeper. He hadn't treated her injuries like an inconvenience to manage. He had treated her like someone worth protecting, then looked at me with a focus that made her uneasy. She didn't accuse or push. She just let the observations sit there, heavy and tender. I zipped the bag halfway and set it by the door, because the sight of it grounded me. Then Cole knocked and guided me down the hall to Gideon's study. The door was open, as if he never needed privacy to feel powerful. Gideon looked up once, eyes moving from my face to the suitcase handle without asking how he already knew. He made a small gesture toward a chair, patient and final. I sat, palms flat on my thighs to steady them. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and paper, like decisions were written here. Mine counted today. He didn't soften what he was. In the quiet way he spoke, I understood he ran things the city pretended not to see, and he would not apologize for it because apology would be another lie. Staying near him would mean living with consequences, headlines, enemies, favors that look like gifts. He told me he wanted me to choose with my eyes open, not because fear pushed me into the nearest shelter. He didn't promise romance or safety forever. He promised clarity. The honesty hit harder than comfort, because comfort can be taken back. That was his offer. I listened and pictured Eli's small hand in mine, the way his eyes searched rooms before his feet moved. I pictured Evelyn pretending she wasn't tired, because tired women get punished. I told Gideon I wasn't an accessory to anyone's life. I came with a child who needed stability, not secrecy. I came with a mother who deserved dignity, not a new kind of dependence. I could be grateful and still refuse to be managed. I would not be hidden behind gates like a trophy, or paraded as proof of his softness. If I stayed, it had to be real. Then the thought I'd carried from the library surfaced, sharp as a needle. I told him my condition wasn't money or a ring or a title. It was direction. He had to return to the life he'd abandoned and finish the medical degree that still haunted his margins. Not someday, not when things calmed down, but as a commitment with dates and effort. If he wanted me near him, he had to prove he could choose something cleaner than power. I wasn't asking him to become harmless. I was asking him to become accountable, like I am for Eli too. For the first time since I met him, Gideon went still in a way that wasn't strategic. His gaze dropped to my suitcase by the door, then returned to my face as if weighing whether I meant it. I did. After a long pause, he nodded once, slow and decisive. He didn't bargain or charm. He accepted the condition like he'd been waiting for someone to demand more than fear. He said he would enroll again and finish, even if it exposed him, even if it hurt. The promise didn't sound pretty. It sounded like work, and I respected that. Before I could relax into that tiny hope, Gideon added another piece, quiet and sharp. Derek's filing, he implied, was too polished for a man who usually bullied in person. Someone had coached him, funded him, and aimed him at my weakest point. Gideon didn't name the person yet, but I felt a larger shadow behind Derek's sudden confidence. That realization made my skin prickle. This wasn't only my private nightmare. It was strategy. I pictured Eli's drawings on the table and felt my anger harden into purpose. I would not let them, not with fear, but with proof alone. When I returned to my room, the suitcase still sat by the door, half-packed, like an exit I'd used my whole life. I didn't move it, but I didn't unpack either. And I watched Eli sleep and understood running would hand Derek what he was claiming. Chaos, instability, a mother who disappears. I needed receipts, timelines, screenshots, and witnesses who could speak without shaking. Downstairs, a printer hummed, and footsteps moved with quiet purpose, gathering proof. I lay awake with my phone in my hand, not waiting for Derek's next threat, but building my answer. Tomorrow, I started compiling everything. 72 hours turned my thoughts into a metronome. I woke before the estate did, heart already running, then forced my face calm because Eli watched everything. At breakfast, I laughed at his rocket story and kept my hands under the table so he would not see them tremble. Fear wanted noise, but I fed it tasks instead. Proof, not panic, I repeated like a prayer. In the guest room, I spread Derek's petition across the bed and told myself the paper was not a verdict, just a challenge. I could not afford to be vague anymore, not with myself. I opened my phone and scrolled backward through months, saving every message that smelled like control. I screenshot threats disguised as concern, and I wrote dates on a legal pad the way I charted symptoms on a ward. I listed each time Derek broke something, each time Evelyn called in sick, each time I slept on the couch to keep Eli away from shouting. I saved receipts from the sitter, school emails, clinic orientation forms, anything that proved routine. When my mind tried to soften the truth, I corrected it, line by line. Accuracy felt cruel, but it was necessary. Evelyn's employment history went into a folder. 12 years of pay stubs and schedules that showed she did not invent emergencies. I added my nursing transcripts and the offer letter I had been chasing before I came home. I mapped Eli's days by hours, school drop-off, homework, dinner, bedtime, because stability is made of boring details. At night, I practiced saying what happened without shrinking it, without blaming stress or bad luck. My throat tightened every time, but I kept going, because a judge would not read between my silences. I needed my voice to be truth, not apology. The surprise came from Marisol. She asked me to meet her near the linen closet, expression as clipped as always, then handed me a thin envelope. Inside were gate logs and security notes, dates when Derek had lingered outside the property, pretending he was lost, pretending he knew people. There were call records from the estate line, messages left in his name, and a brief report about him boasting of access he never earned. Marisol did not offer comfort. She offered documentation. In that moment, I understood the house ran on rules, and sometimes rules could protect me after all. The night before court, Gideon's attorney organized my papers into labeled stacks, while Gideon stayed in the background, letting the plan belong to me. Cole arranged a route that avoided cameras and crowds. Evelyn pressed a warm cloth to my cheek like she was trying to smooth fear out of my skin. Eli fell asleep with his backpack beside the bed, ready for a world he should not have to prepare for. I lay awake listening to the estate breathe, and I wondered who I was without crisis. Then I reminded myself that tomorrow I only had to be clear. In the morning, the courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. The waiting area was bright and indifferent, a place where private pain becomes public schedule. Derek sat at a table in a pressed shirt, posture calm, eyes steady, as if he were the parent who never raised his voice, Seeing that performance made my stomach twist. I held Eli's hand and focused on his small fingers, grounding myself in what mattered. When we entered the hearing room, everything looked neutral. Beige walls, neat chairs, a judge who glanced at my file before glancing at me like I was evidence. Derek's filing framed Gideon as the threat, and me as a reckless woman chasing protection in the wrong arms. The implication was sharp. I had chosen danger and dragged my child into it. Anger rose so fast it blurred my vision. But I kept my voice steady inside my head and let the documents speak. Our attorney presented the timelines, the messages, the gate logs, the sitter receipts, the routine that proved I was not unstable, just exhausted. I watched the judge's pen move, and I realized my survival now depended on ink, not tears, and Derek cannot charm paper. The ruling did not come like thunder. It came like a pause. The judge ordered more review, more time, a temporary arrangement that felt like standing on one foot and calling it balance. Eli asked when we were going home, and I told him soon, because children deserve certainty, even when adults do not have it. Outside, the air felt too cold, and my hands shook once the doors closed behind us. I had not lost, but I had not won. My stomach stayed hollow, measuring each hour until the next hearing date. I walked like I carried glass inside. In the car back to the estate, I replayed Derek's smile and felt something off, like a costume that fit too well. He had never been that careful with words at home. Someone had taught him which phrases sounded responsible, which accusations sounded urgent, which pauses made him look wounded. Gideon's warning echoed, and my fear shifted shape. If Derek was a pawn, who was moving him? I stared at my evidence and understood the next fight would not be only about custody. It would be about power. I tightened my grip and promised myself I would keep looking harder. After the hearing, the judge's temporary order felt like a thin blanket. Eli could stay with me, and Derek had to keep distance unless supervised. For one breath, I let relief flood my chest, guilty and warm. I bought Eli a pretzel from the cart outside, and he smiled like the world was simple again. Then Derek walked past us, shoulders relaxed, nodding at his lawyer as if he had already won. The confidence didn't match the man who used to shout in kitchens. It looked practiced, expensive, and new. His tie sat straight, like someone dressed him for court. Back at the estate, I opened my folder and stared at Derek's filings again. The language was oddly polished, full of phrases about stability and best interests. Derek never spoke that way, not even when he apologized. I remembered Marisol's envelope, the gate notes about Derek hovering outside, and I noticed a new name scribbled beside one date: Rourke Security Consulting. It wasn't a company Evelyn ever mentioned. Cole later confirmed the same name appeared on a vendor request, unsubmitted the week Derek hired his attorney. My skin tightened. Money had entered our misery, and it wore a clean suit. I asked Gideon's attorney what Rourke Security was. She didn't answer directly, but her eyes flicked toward the window like she was checking who might listen. Later, Gideon met me in the corridor and explained, in that spare way of his, that Caleb Rourke was a rival who preferred boardrooms to back alleys. Caleb donated to hospitals, posed for charity photos, and bought politicians dinner. He also bought pressure. If Derek had been given money and coaching, it would be because Caleb wanted Gideon distracted, and my child made the perfect lever. Caleb never touched us, but he hurt us. That night, I watched Eli sleep and felt rage morph into panic. I wasn't built for crime wars, and I was built for bedtime stories and scraped knees. Yet my son's name now lived in someone else's strategy folder. I pictured Caleb's clean smile on a billboard and imagined him saying my life was collateral. The thought made me nauseous. Evelyn tried to reassure me with small gestures, folding Eli's clothes, smoothing his blanket, but I could see her hands shaking too. We had escaped Derek's fists, only to meet a quieter violence made of influence, and my breath turned shallow. In the morning, Gideon laid out the map without drama. Caleb was squeezing his legitimate businesses, filing complaints, delaying permits, and stirring rumors about the Kane name. Derek's custody move was a side strike meant to pull me into public spectacle and keep Gideon reacting. Gideon said the safest answer was to reduce exposure. Move us to a smaller house across town, one owned quietly, with fewer staff and no headlines. He described it like a normal place, a kitchen, a yard, a short drive to school. His plan sounded reasonable, and that scared me most because cages can glitter. I thanked him in my head and hated myself for needing to. Then the other thought arrived. Relocation is what Derek always demanded, just with different wallpaper. I imagined Eli waking in yet another strange bedroom, asking where his school was, and I felt something harden. I had survived by disappearing before men could decide my life. Gideon wasn't Derek, but power is still power, and my body did not trust it. I told myself I could accept temporary logistics, but not a new identity. Safety had to feel like choice, not transfer, and I needed roots, not another borrowed shelter. That evening, I sat with Gideon in the study and named my boundaries again, calmer this time. Eli comes first. Evelyn is not a bargaining chip. I will not be hidden, displayed, or used as proof of anyone's conscience. Gideon listened without interruption, hands still, face unreadable. He agreed to the safe house as an option, not a sentence, and he reiterated the promise that mattered to me. The degree, the classrooms, the work that would pull him toward a different legacy. If he wanted me near him, he had to keep building a future I could live inside fully. Later, alone, I made a quieter plan. I would not let Caleb's games freeze my life. I would apply for nursing positions near the city, secure childcare that didn't depend on favors, and build routines that judges understand. And I would keep my own bank account, my own keys, my own name on the lease, even if Gideon helped pay for safety upgrades. Accepting help didn't mean surrendering autonomy. Eli deserved a mother who stayed steady in daylight, not one who only survived at night. I could cooperate with Gideon's security and still insist on being the author of my days. Caleb Rourke stayed unseen, and that made him more dangerous. Derek's smirk at court was no longer the main problem. It was the evidence of a handler. I held Eli's backpack strap as we walked the estate hallway and asked myself who benefits when a mother looks unstable. The answer tasted like money. Gideon's world had reached into mine, but I refused to let it define me. I would rebuild, one shift at a time, one bedtime at a time, while Gideon proved his promise with enrollment forms and late-night study. If we begin again, it will be on purpose. On my first Monday at the Southside Community Clinic, my name sat on a plastic badge like a promise I could finally keep. I walked through fluorescent halls that smelled of soap and coffee, and I felt the strange dignity of being useful on my own terms. My hands were steady while I took vitals, checked charts, and listened without rushing. Nobody cared who I knew or where I slept last week. They cared whether I showed up, whether I noticed pain early, whether I treated people like people. For once, my worth wasn't an argument. I could breathe here. After my shift, life became smaller and better. Pickup, snacks, homework, dinner, bath, story, sleep. I started setting the same bowl on the same counter, packing the same lunch, tying the same shoelaces, because routine is armor you don't have to explain. Eli learned the walk from the bus stop to our temporary apartment, counting cracks in the sidewalk and pointing out dogs like the world was safe enough to notice details again. At night, I laid out his clothes for morning and checked the door locks once, not 10 times. Progress looked ordinary, and that ordinariness felt miraculous today. Gideon did his part in the quietest way. Paperwork, schedules, and fatigue. One evening, Cole dropped off a folder from the university registrar, and I saw Gideon's sign where his old life restarted. He began attending evening classes, then came back to the estate with textbooks under his arm and a bruise of exhaustion under his eyes. The medical book with 2 inks no longer felt like a relic. It felt like a bridge being built in real time. Sometimes I sat across the table after my shift, studying him, refusing to let him vanish into excuses again now. I kept my boundaries visible, like lines on the road. I didn't attend Gideon's meetings, didn't sit beside him in photographs, didn't let staff call me anything that sounded like possession. When Caleb Rourke's pressure rippled through the news, I treated it like weather. Real, dangerous, not in my control. Cole changed routes. The clinic received a suspicious complaint about my credentials that went nowhere, but it reminded me the game was still on. I explained to Eli, in simple truths, that some grown-ups lie to feel powerful, and we answer by staying steady even when my knees shake hard. Midweek, Gideon handed me a thin packet, not as a gift, but as paperwork. Inside was a lease for a small place near Eli's school, and my name was the only one on it. There was also a new bank account opened in my name, seated with enough for deposits and emergencies, and a childcare plan arranged through a vetted agency. The message underneath all of it was clear without being spoken. This was mine, not his. Help that didn't hook into my throat. Relief washed through me, and then suspicion followed, because survival teaches you to look for strings. I hated that I was suspicious. I hated that kindness had to pass through my filter first. I sat on the edge of my bed and traced my own signature, realizing how long it had been since I signed anything that belonged to me. Part of me wanted to cry from gratitude. Another part wanted to throw the papers away and prove I needed nothing. Gideon didn't push for either response. He kept showing up, tired from class, asking nothing beyond honesty. Late at night, we shared silence at the kitchen table, choosing restraint over impulse until morning felt softer. His studying became part of our household rhythm. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he drove to campus after dinner, then returned with highlighted pages and a look that said he had fought himself and won. A tutor came once a week, and Gideon listened like a student, not a boss. When he got stuck, he didn't slam doors. He took a breath and tried again. I recognized that discipline as a kind of love, not for me, but for the life he might still earn. The blue ink in his margins multiplied, covering old black notes without erasing them at all. Caleb didn't disappear, but his pressure started to feel less personal when I built structure around it. The clinic kept my schedule, the school kept Eli's, and the new apartment kept our evenings predictable. Evelyn visited after physical therapy appointments, bringing soup and quiet pride, and she stopped apologizing every time she sat down. We still used Cole's routes on court days, and I kept a folder of documents in my purse. Yet something shifted. I began to imagine a future that wasn't shaped like a chase. If danger showed up in clean clothes, I could answer in clean facts. One night, after homework and bath, Eli sat on the couch with his knees tucked up and watched Gideon at the table, bent over notes. Eli's eyes moved between us, careful, curious. Later, while I tucked him in, he asked what Gideon was to us, and I felt my throat tighten because labels can become weapons. I told myself I didn't need a perfect word yet. I needed direction. Gideon would keep proving his promise with every class he attended and every choice that pulled him toward a better legacy. I would keep building a life that stayed mine always. Spring arrived the way healing does, not in one bright moment, but in small proofs that kept showing up. I started my mornings with clinic scrubs and a travel mug, then switched to Eli's backpack and spelling words at the kitchen counter. By the time the sun went down, our apartment smelled like dish soap and pencil shavings instead of fear. I still checked the lock, but I stopped listening for footsteps that weren't there. Some nights I caught myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, and then I remembered I was allowed to set the shoes down. Gideon's semester looked nothing like the myths people tell about men like him. It was fluorescent classrooms, printed syllabi, and the quiet humiliation of being a beginner again. He came home with highlighters in his pockets and exhaustion under his eyes, sitting at our table like it was the only place he could be ordinary. When he stumbled over a concept, he didn't snap. He turned the page, wrote the mistake, and tried again. I watched that persistence like it was a language I'd been starving to hear. Some evenings, after my clinic shift, I sat across from him with my own notes open, not studying, just witnessing. The old medical textbook with the two inks stayed nearby, its faded margins beside his new blue scribbles, past and present meeting without erasing each other. When frustration rose, I reminded him of the promise I had demanded, and I reminded myself that accountability can be gentler than pity. He started meeting a tutor twice a week, showing up early, asking questions like he had nothing to prove. That was the real change. Not a softer voice, but a different kind of pride. Evelyn healed in parallel. The first time she walked into the Kane estate again, she did it with her shoulders higher, not because she was pretending, but because she finally had support behind her. Marisol gave her a new title and a schedule that included rest days, and Gideon adjusted her pay to $80,000, calling it overdue instead of generous. My mother cried in the car afterward, quiet and embarrassed, then laughed when Eli asked if that meant she could buy the fancy cereal. It wasn't the money that moved her. It was the message that her years had counted. Derek's power collapsed the way it had been built, through paper. The temporary order became longer-term boundaries, supervised contact, and strict distance that the court could measure. When he tried to twist the story again, the evidence answered for me. Messages, logs, witness notes, and his own inconsistencies. A separate investigation into falsified claims and financial pressure forced his lawyer to step back and his confidence to shrink. I never needed him to suffer. I needed him to stop reaching for us. And for once, the system enforced what my body had always known. Between those milestones, there were ordinary hard days that didn't make good stories, but made a real life at last. I attended the follow-up hearing with a folder so thick it bent my bag strap. And I kept my eyes on Eli's coloring book while adults debated our schedule. The judge extended the supervised visits, ordered Derek to attend counseling, and warned him that a single violation would trigger stronger consequences. For the first time, Derek looked smaller than his paperwork, and I felt a strange ache for the version of me who used to accept crumbs as peace. Gideon stayed in the back row, not as a threat, but as a witness to my boundaries. Afterward, he drove us home in a plain car, letting me choose the music, letting silence be enough. I put Eli in a children's support group at the clinic, and I watched his shoulders drop over weeks, one careful breath at a time. Caleb Rourke didn't lose because someone hit harder. He lost because his clean image couldn't survive light. Gideon's attorney traced the consulting payments, on the coordinated complaints, the vendor names that led back to the same shell addresses. Partners backed away when they realized the pressure campaign would land on their desks, too. A charity board quietly removed his name from a gala program, and the local paper stopped praising him without questions. He remained rich, but his leverage thinned, and the people who had been paid to move for him found new patrons. Watching it happen taught me a hard truth. Violence isn't the only weapon, and it isn't the only way to disarm one. Through all of it, I kept choosing my life in small, stubborn ways. I kept my job. I kept Eli's routine. I kept my name on my lease and my hands on my own keys. Gideon stayed in my orbit because he respected those choices, not because he owned them. I didn't fall for power. I fell for safety that didn't demand silence, for protection that didn't ask me to shrink, for a man who could sit at a table and do the work he once abandoned. One Friday night, our kitchen looked almost boring. Eli did homework with his tongue between his teeth. Evelyn chopped vegetables for soup, humming softly. Gideon sat at the far end with flashcards spread like a map, rubbing his eyes, then turning to the next card anyway. I flipped the calendar to the next month and realized my hands were steady. Eli laughed at something on a worksheet, and I didn't flinch. The sound didn't feel like a risk. It felt like a home. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Survival is not the same as living, and it is never too late to begin again. Not for me, not for my mother, not even for a man who once believed he was past redemption. If this meant something to you, tap like, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and comment the moment you realized you deserved better.